The marketplace of Kepler Station buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy traded goods and information. Towering Zephyrians with their crystal-like skin haggled with short, furry mollusk merchants over rare minerals. The air hummed with translator devices working overtime to bridge dozens of languages. In the midst of this chaos, 8-year-old Tommy Chen clutched his father's hand tightly. The small human boy's eyes were wide with wonder as he took in the alien sights and sounds around him. His father, Dr. Michael Chen, was one of the few human scientists allowed on this neutral trading station, here to study xenobiology samples. "Stay close, Tommy," Michael whispered, guiding his son through the crowd. "Remember what I told you about being respectful to everyone here?" Tommy nodded eagerly. His father had explained that humans were still newcomers to galactic society. Most alien species had been traveling the stars for thousands of years, while humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were tolerated on stations like this, but barely. As they walked past a food vendor selling what looked like glowing purple noodles, Tommy's attention was caught by a commotion near the central plaza. A group of Drakmaran soldiers in their distinctive black armor were inspecting cargo containers. The Drakmarans were the galaxy's self-appointed peacekeepers, though most species knew they were really just bullies with advanced technology. The lead soldier, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like oil, was berating a small Felinian trader. The cat-like alien cowered as the Drakmaran's voice boomed through his helmet's speakers. "These permits are expired, furball," the soldier snarled. "According to Galactic Code 7749, I'm confiscating this entire shipment." The Felinian's whiskers trembled. "Please, honored one. I have a family to feed. These medicines are for the colony on Tau Ceti. Children will die without them." "Not my problem," the Drakmaran replied coldly. He gestured to his subordinates. "Load it onto our ship. Command will decide what to do with it." Tommy watched in horror as the soldiers began taking boxes marked with medical symbols. His young mind couldn't fully grasp the complex politics at play, but he understood that sick children needed medicine. His father had taught him that helping people was always the right thing to do. "Dad," Tommy tugged on Michael's sleeve, "why are they taking the medicine from the nice cat man?" Michael's jaw tightened. He'd seen this kind of abuse before. The Drakmarans used their military might to steal from weaker species, always hiding behind some technicality in their massive legal code. But humans were in no position to intervene. They were barely tolerated here as it was. "It's complicated, son," Michael said quietly. "Sometimes people in power do things that aren't fair. But you always tell me to help people when they're in trouble," Tommy said, his voice rising slightly. Several nearby aliens glanced their way nervously. Humans had a reputation for being unpredictable, and the last thing anyone wanted was to draw the Drakmaran's attention. "Tommy, we need to stay out of this," Michael warned. But his son was already walking toward the confrontation. The lead Drakmaran soldier had removed his helmet, revealing a reptilian face with cold yellow eyes. He was now personally examining some of the confiscated medical supplies when Tommy approached. "Excuse me, mister," Tommy said politely, looking up at the towering alien. "Those medicines are for sick children. My dad says it's always wrong to take things that help sick people." The Drakmaran looked down at the small human with amusement. Around the plaza, conversations had stopped. Everyone was staring at the tiny human child who had just challenged one of the most feared soldiers in the galaxy. "Little mammal," the Drakmaran said with a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. "Your species has been in space for what, a few decades? We Drakmarans have maintained order in this galaxy for 5,000 years. I don't think you understand how things work here." "I understand that taking medicine from sick kids is mean," Tommy said firmly. The soldier's amusement turned to irritation. "Your parents should teach you better manners, human whelp. In Drakmaran space, children who speak out of turn receive punishment." Before Michael could reach his son, the Drachmaran raised his massive clawed hand. The soldier was easily 3 times Tommy's size, with strength that could crush bones. Around the plaza, aliens gasped and looked away, not wanting to witness what was about to happen. But as the Drachmaran's hand came down toward Tommy's face, something unexpected occurred. The boy didn't flinch or cower. Instead, he stepped forward and slapped the soldier's scaly cheek with his small human hand. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent marketplace like a gunshot. For a moment, nothing happened. The Drachmaran soldier stood frozen, his yellow eyes wide with shock. No one had ever dared to strike him before. In his 5 decades of military service, spanning dozens of worlds and countless conflicts, he had never experienced such audacity from anyone, let alone a child barely tall enough to reach his waist. Then the soldier began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, but quickly built to a roar of amusement that filled the entire plaza. "You have spirit, little mammal," the Drachmaran said, rubbing his cheek where Tommy had slapped him. "Very well. Since you're so concerned about these medicines, perhaps we can make a deal." The crowd held its breath. Everyone knew Drachmaran deals were never fair. "I'll return half the shipment," the soldier continued, his eyes gleaming with malice, "if you can answer one simple question correctly. But if you fail, I take everything, including whatever cargo your father is carrying." Michael finally reached his son and put a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. "My son doesn't need to answer anything. We're leaving." "Oh, but he's already accepted the challenge by striking me," the Drachmaran said smoothly. "Galactic Code 3312 clearly states that any physical assault on a peacekeeping officer constitutes formal acceptance of combat or contest. The boy must answer my question, or face the consequences for assault." Michael's blood ran cold. He knew enough about Drachmaran law to recognize the trap they'd fallen into. Around them, other aliens shook their heads sadly. They'd seen this trick before. "What's the question?" Tommy asked before his father could stop him. The Drachmaran's grin revealed rows of sharp teeth. "Tell me, little human, why should anyone in this galaxy respect your species? You've been in space for barely 50 years. You have no great achievements, no ancient wisdom, no powerful technology. Your people are weak, short-lived, and insignificant. So tell me, what makes humans special enough to deserve a voice in galactic affairs?" The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Around the plaza, aliens nodded reluctantly. It was a fair question from their perspective. Humanity was indeed the youngest spacefaring species, with the shortest history and least advanced technology. What did they contribute to galactic civilization? Tommy looked up at his father, then back at the towering Drachmaran. The 8-year-old boy took a deep breath and spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried across the silent marketplace. "I don't know about all that stuff you said," Tommy began. "But I know that when I saw you taking medicine from sick children, it made me feel bad inside. And when something makes me feel bad inside, my dad taught me to try to make it right, even if it's scary." The Drachmaran's expression shifted slightly, his amusement fading. Tommy continued, his young voice growing stronger. "Maybe we humans aren't as old or as strong as everyone else. But my dad says being strong doesn't mean hurting people who can't fight back. He says being smart doesn't mean tricking people who don't know better. And being important doesn't mean taking things from people who need them more than you do." Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Some aliens were nodding thoughtfully. "You asked what makes humans special," Tommy said, looking directly into the Drachmaran's yellow eyes. "I think maybe we're special because we're small enough to see when big people are being bullies, and young enough to still think we should do something about it." The plaza had become completely silent, except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The Drachmaran soldier stared down at the small human boy, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Your answer is inadequate, human child. Sentiment and emotion have no place in galactic law. You have failed the challenge. But before he could give orders to confiscate the medical supplies and arrest Michael, another voice spoke from the crowd. Actually, I found the boy's answer quite illuminating. Everyone turned to see a figure approaching from the outer ring of spectators. It was an elderly Xantharian, one of the galaxy's most respected philosophical species. His translucent blue skin glowed softly with inner light, and his 4 eyes regarded the scene with ancient wisdom. "Honored Xantharian," the Drachmaran said stiffly, "this is a military matter. Your philosophical opinions are not required." "On the contrary," the Xantharian replied calmly, "I invoke the right of intellectual discourse as outlined in Galactic Code 1247. When a question of philosophical significance is raised in a public forum, any citizen may contribute to the discussion." The Drachmaran's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue with galactic law. The right of intellectual discourse was ancient and absolute. The Xantharian approached Tommy and knelt down to his eye level. "Young human, your words remind me of something my species learned long ago. We Xantharians have existed for over 10,000 years. We have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. And do you know what we've observed?" Tommy shook his head, wide-eyed. "We've learned that a species' age, strength, or technological advancement means nothing compared to their moral courage. The greatest civilizations in galactic history were not the oldest or the strongest. They were the ones brave enough to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous." The Xantharian stood and addressed the crowd. "This child has just demonstrated something that many so-called advanced species have forgotten. He saw injustice and chose to act despite being completely outmatched. He answered the soldier's question not with arrogance or boastfulness, but with simple honesty about his values." Other aliens in the crowd began to murmur agreement. A Aquarian merchant stepped forward, her gills fluttering with emotion. "The Xantharian speaks truth," she said in her musical voice. "My people have traded with humans for 20 years now. They are honest in their dealings and quick to help those in need. When raiders attacked our colony ships, it was human vessels that came to our aid, asking for nothing in return." A massive Goliathan engineer added his deep voice to the conversation. "Humans helped us rebuild our mining stations after the solar flares damaged our equipment. They shared their techniques freely, never demanding payment or favors." More voices joined in, each adding their own experiences with humanity. Stories of rescue missions, medical aid, technological assistance, and simple acts of kindness began to fill the plaza. The Drachmaran soldier found himself surrounded not by the fearful silence he was accustomed to, but by a growing chorus of aliens defending the very species he had just insulted. Tommy listened in amazement as being after being spoke up for humanity. He had never realized that his people had made such an impact in their short time among the stars. The Drachmaran raised his hand for silence, his yellow eyes narrowing dangerously. "Enough! Emotional testimonials change nothing. The law is the law, and this human child has failed my challenge. The consequences stand." But the Xantharian stepped between the soldier and Tommy, his ancient eyes blazing with inner fire. "Then perhaps," the philosopher said quietly, "it is time someone challenged your interpretation of the law." The marketplace erupted as beings who had lived in fear of Drachmaran oppression for generations finally found their voice. And at the center of it all stood a small human boy who had started a revolution with nothing more than a slap and the simple belief that right was right, regardless of how big or scary the opposition might be. Michael Chen pulled his son close, realizing that their lives had just changed forever. Tommy had done something unprecedented in galactic history. He had made the mighty Drachmaran Empire blink. But this was only the beginning of a much larger story that would reshape the balance of power across the known galaxy. The standoff in Kepler Station's marketplace had drawn attention from across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours of Tommy's slap being recorded on dozens of personal devices, the footage was spreading through hyperspace communication networks at light speed. The image of a small human child standing up to a Drakmaran soldier resonated with oppressed species everywhere. News of the incident reached the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime just as they were debating new trade regulations. The massive circular chamber, with representatives from 47 species seated in rings around a central holographic display, fell silent as the footage played. Ambassador Krelix of the Drakmaran Empire, an imposing figure even among his own kind, watched the recording with growing fury. His scaled hands gripped the armrests of his ceremonial chair hard enough to leave marks. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," Krelix said when the footage ended, his voice carrying the authority of 5,000 years of galactic dominance. "A minor incident involving an overzealous junior officer and an undisciplined human child. It has no bearing on official policy." But Ambassador Thilla of the Xantharian Collective stood slowly, her translucent form shimmering with controlled emotion. As one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, her words carried immense weight. "With respect, Ambassador Krelix, this incident highlights a pattern of behavior that my people have observed for centuries. The Drakmaran Empire's interpretation of galactic law has become increasingly aggressive and self-serving." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Species that had never dared to challenge Drakmaran authority began to exchange meaningful looks. Ambassador Krelix's eyes narrowed. The Xantharians speak of patterns, but where were their objections during the Outer Rim Rebellion? We maintained order when lesser species would have let chaos reign. Our methods may seem harsh to philosophical minds, but they are effective. "Your methods," interrupted Ambassador Chen of Earth, "include extorting medical supplies from refugees and threatening children." The human ambassador was new to the council, having been appointed only 3 years earlier when humanity achieved full membership status. Most species still considered humans too young and inexperienced to contribute meaningfully to galactic governance. But the footage from Kepler Station had changed something fundamental. Ambassador Chen continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to propose. "I call for a formal investigation into Drakmaran enforcement practices across all neutral territories." The chamber erupted. Such a motion had never been made in the Council's 3,000-year history. The Drakmaran Empire had always been considered above reproach, their military might ensuring that their interpretation of galactic law went unchallenged. Meanwhile, back on Kepler Station, Tommy and his father found themselves under protective custody in the Earth Embassy's small offices. Outside, crowds of aliens had gathered, many holding signs written in dozens of different languages. The universal translators worked overtime to convert the messages, but their meaning was clear. Justice for children, no more bullies, stand with humanity. Dr. Michael Chen paced nervously while Tommy sat at a small table, drawing pictures with colored markers that Ambassador Sarah Martinez had given him. The boy seemed remarkably calm for someone who had just challenged the most powerful military force in the galaxy. "Tommy," Michael said gently, sitting down beside his son, "do you understand what happened today?" The 8-year-old looked up from his drawing, which appeared to show stick figures of different colors holding hands around a circle. "I think I made people mad," Tommy said simply. "But the cat man got to keep some of his medicine, so the sick kids will be okay." Michael smiled despite his worry. His son's innocence was both his greatest strength and what made this situation so dangerous. Tommy had acted purely from the heart, without understanding the complex political ramifications of his actions. That soldier, the big lizard man, he wasn't just any soldier, Michael explained. His people, the Drakmarans, they're like the police for the whole galaxy. They have rules that everyone has to follow. Even when the rules are mean? Tommy asked. Especially then, Michael said sadly. That's what makes this complicated. Ambassador Martinez burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Michael, we need to talk. The situation has escalated beyond anything we've ever seen. She activated a holographic display showing news feeds from across the galaxy. Every major network was covering the story, with analysis and commentary from experts of every species. The footage of Tommy's confrontation has gone viral, Martinez explained, but more importantly, it's inspired something we never expected. Look at this. The display showed images from dozens of worlds. On Felinia Prime, thousands of cat-like aliens marched through the capital, demanding justice for their persecuted traitors. On the water world of Aquatica, normally peaceful mer-people were staging the first protests in their species' history. Even the usually neutral Crystalline Confederacy had issued a statement calling for reassessment of current power structures. It's not just about Tommy anymore, Martinez continued. Your son has become a symbol. The small, brave individual standing up to overwhelming power. It's resonating with species that have felt oppressed for generations. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah, we need to get Tommy off this station. If the Drakmarans decide to make an example of him... That's what I'm trying to tell you, the ambassador interrupted. We can't leave. The Galactic Council has ordered all parties to remain here pending a formal investigation. And there's more. The Drakmaran fleet just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Through the embassy's windows, they could see the ominous shapes of Drakmaran warships as they took up positions around the station. The massive vessels, each capable of destroying a small planet, served as a stark reminder of the Empire's military superiority. But something unexpected was happening in the space around Kepler Station. Other ships were arriving as well. Xantharian philosophical vessels with their distinctive crystal hulls. Aquarian medical ships shaped like flowing water. Felinian trade convoys that had diverted from their planned routes. Even ships from species that rarely left their home systems. Within the embassy, Tommy looked up from his drawing as Ambassador Martinez's communication device chimed urgently. Ambassador, came the voice of the station commander. We have a problem. The Drakmaran fleet commander is demanding immediate extradition of the human child under Galactic Military Code 8834. He claims the boy committed assault on a peacekeeping officer. And our response? Martinez asked. Well, ma'am, that's where it gets interesting. The Xantharian Fleet Admiral is invoking Article 12 of the Galactic Protection Accords, claiming the child as a refugee under philosophical asylum. The Aquarians are citing medical protection protocols, saying any extradition would cause psychological trauma. And the Felinians, well, they're just saying, over our dead bodies in about 15 different languages. Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, why is everyone fighting about me? I just wanted to help the cat man. Michael knelt down to his son's level. Sometimes, Tommy, when one person does something brave, it reminds everyone else that they can be brave too. That's what's happening now. Ambassador Martinez was studying the tactical display showing ship positions around the station. This is unprecedented. We have representatives from 30 different species forming what looks like a defensive perimeter around Kepler Station. They're not officially allied with each other, but they all seem to agree on one thing. Tommy stays here. Suddenly, the embassy's communications system activated with an incoming transmission. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Drakmaran command vessel. Fleet Admiral Vorthak, a massive Drakmaran with battle scars covering his scales, glared out at them with cold yellow eyes. Human Ambassador! Vorthak's voice rumbled through the speakers. You will surrender the criminal child immediately. This incident threatens the stability of galactic order." Before Martinez could respond, Tommy walked over to the display. The 8-year-old boy looked up at the fearsome alien admiral without flinching. "Mr. Admiral," Tommy said politely, "I'm sorry if I hurt your soldier's feelings, but he was being mean to the cat people, and my dad says we should always help when someone's being mean to someone smaller." Admiral Vorthak stared at the small human child in disbelief. In his century of military service, no one had ever apologized to him while simultaneously defending their actions against his forces. "Your sentiment is noted, human child," Vorthak said slowly. "But law is not based on feelings. You struck a Drakmaran officer. In our culture, such an action demands severe consequences." "In our culture," Tommy replied simply, "hitting kids is wrong. So maybe your soldier should apologize too." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the embassy in stunned silence. "Did my 8-year-old son just demand an apology from a Drakmaran fleet admiral?" Michael asked weakly. "I think he did more than that," Ambassador Martinez whispered. "I think he just redefined the terms of this entire conflict." Outside the embassy, the crowds were growing larger and more diverse. Beings who had never interacted peacefully were standing together, united by a shared sense of injustice. Street vendors from different species shared food freely. Children from various worlds played together while their parents watched nervously. But the most significant development was happening in the upper levels of the station, where emergency diplomatic meetings were taking place around the clock. Species that had accepted Drakmaran dominance for centuries were beginning to ask difficult questions. The Mollusk Collective's chief diplomat, a furry creature named Bristleclaw, had called an unprecedented gathering of what he termed secondary species, those who had never held real power in galactic politics. "The human child has shown us something important," Bristleclaw squeaked to the assembled delegates. "He has proven that size and age do not determine righteousness. If a young creature from the newest species can stand up for justice, what excuse do we have for our centuries of silence?" In another conference room, the elder races were having their own discussions. The Xantharians, crystalline confederacy, and ancient builders, species so old their origins were lost to history, were debating the philosophical implications of Tommy's actions. "The child has raised a fundamental question," said Crystal Singer, the Confederacy's representative. "We have allowed military might to supersede moral authority for so long that we have forgotten the difference between order and justice." Ancient builder construct 7742, a being of living stone who had witnessed the rise of interstellar civilization, spoke in harmonics that required special translators. "This small human has done what we failed to do in millennia of existence. He has reminded us why civilization exists in the first place, to protect the weak, not to empower the strong." But perhaps the most important conversation was taking place in the depths of the Drakmaran command ship, where Fleet Admiral Vorthak was receiving an encrypted communication from the Empire's capital world. "Admiral," came the voice of Supreme Commander Thrak, the most powerful Drakmaran in the galaxy. "Explain to me how a single human child has managed to unite half the galaxy against us." Vorthak's usual confidence wavered. "Supreme Commander, the situation is complex. The child's actions have triggered an emotional response among the member species. They are not thinking logically." "No, Admiral, they are thinking clearly for the first time in centuries. This child has exposed a weakness in our system that we failed to see. Our power has always rested on the assumption that smaller species would never unite against us. That assumption has just been proven false." The communication went silent for a moment before Thrak continued. "The Galactic Council has called for an emergency session. Species that have never challenged us are now demanding representation in our enforcement protocols. If we crush this rebellion with force, we may win the battle but lose our legitimacy forever." "What are your orders, Supreme Commander?" Another long pause. Find a solution that preserves our authority while addressing their concerns. And, Admiral, perhaps it's time we remembered that true strength lies not in crushing opposition, but in preventing it from arising in the first place. As night cycled through Kepler Station's artificial lighting systems, Tommy fell asleep on a couch in the embassy, still clutching his box of colored markers. Around him, the adults continued their urgent discussions, but the 8-year-old boy slept peacefully, unaware that his simple act of standing up to a bully had sparked a revolution that would reshape galactic civilization. Outside, ships from dozens of species maintained their vigil around the station, while diplomatic channels buzzed with unprecedented activity. The galaxy's power structure, unchanged for millennia, was about to face its greatest test, and it had all started with a child's slap and a father's lessons about right and wrong. 3 days after Tommy's confrontation with the Drakmaran soldier, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was about to begin. The Great Chamber on Nexus Prime had never seen such attendance. Representatives from species that rarely participated in galactic politics had traveled across the galaxy to be present for this historic moment. Tommy sat in the human delegation section between his father and Ambassador Martinez, wearing his best clothes and looking remarkably calm for someone at the center of a galactic crisis. In his lap, he held the drawing he had been working on, stick figures of different colors holding hands around what looked like a space station. "Remember, Tommy," Ambassador Martinez whispered, "just answer their questions honestly, like you always do." The council chamber buzzed with tension as beings from across the galaxy took their seats. The Drakmaran delegation occupied their traditional place of honor near the center, but for the first time in centuries they seemed isolated. Usually, smaller species would cluster near them, seeking favor and protection. Today, those seats were empty. High Chancellor Zephys of the Ethereal Collective called the session to order. Her voice, translated into dozens of languages simultaneously, echoed through the vast chamber. "We convene this emergency session to address events on Kepler Station and their broader implications for galactic governance. The child Tommy Chen of Earth will speak first, as his actions initiated this crisis." Tommy stood up, and the massive chamber fell silent. Beings who had lived for centuries watched as the small human boy walked to the central platform, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. A floating microphone descended to Tommy's height. He looked around at the hundreds of alien faces watching him, some friendly, some curious. Others clearly hostile. "Hi, everyone," Tommy said simply. "My dad says I should tell you what happened and why I did it." He took a deep breath and began his story, speaking in the clear, honest voice of a child who had never learned to lie for political advantage. "I saw the big lizard soldier taking medicine from the Catman. The Catman said the medicine was for sick children. I know what it's like when you're sick because I had pneumonia last year and it was really scary. My dad says when you see someone being mean to someone who can't fight back, you should help them." Tommy paused, looking directly at the Drakmaran delegation. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings, but taking medicine from sick kids is wrong. I don't care how big you are or how many rules you have. It's just wrong." The chamber remained silent as Tommy continued. "After I slapped the soldier, lots of people started talking about how mean the lizard people have been to everyone. I didn't know about that before, but now I think maybe the problem isn't just one soldier being mean. Maybe the problem is that everyone's been too scared to say stop being mean until now." A ripple of murmurs swept through the chamber. Tommy's simple words had cut through centuries of complex political maneuvering to the heart of the issue. "My dad teaches me that being strong means protecting people who need help. Being smart means figuring out how to make things better for everyone. And being a leader means making sure everyone gets treated fairly." Tommy looked around the chamber one more time. "I think maybe some people forgot those things. but I think they can remember if we all help each other. He walked back to his seat, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence. Ambassador Krelix of the Drakmaran Empire rose slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. "The human child speaks with touching innocence," Krelix began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "But governance requires more than good intentions. For 5,000 years, the Drakmaran Empire has maintained order in this galaxy. We have prevented wars, facilitated trade, and enforced the laws that keep civilization functioning." He gestured toward the assembled delegates. "Yes, our methods can seem harsh to those who have never faced the responsibility of maintaining order across 100,000 worlds. But without firm enforcement, this galaxy would descend into chaos. The alternative to Drakmaran authority is not peaceful cooperation. It is war, suffering, and the collapse of everything we have built together." Many delegates nodded reluctantly. The Drakmarans had indeed maintained galactic peace, even if their methods were often brutal. But then Ambassador Thilla of the Zentharian Collective stood, her translucent form shimmering with inner light. "The honored Drakmaran speaks of order and stability," she said in her melodious voice. "But my people have a saying: a peace built on fear is merely war waiting to happen. For centuries, we have watched smaller species suffer under increasingly harsh enforcement of laws that seem to benefit only those strong enough to impose them." She gestured toward Tommy. "This human child has shown us something we had forgotten. True strength does not require others to fear you. True authority does not need to silence dissent, and true peace cannot exist when justice is denied to those who need it most." What happened next had never occurred in the Council's history. One by one, representatives from smaller species began to stand. The Felinian delegate was first, followed by the Aquarian, then the mollusk representative. Soon, nearly half the chamber was on their feet. Bristle Claw of the Mollusk Collective, his furry body trembling with emotion, stepped forward to speak. "For generations, my people have accepted Drakmaran authority because we believed we had no choice. We convinced ourselves that their protection was worth the price of our freedom. But watching this human child stand up for what was right, regardless of consequences, has reminded us of our own dignity." Similar testimonies began to pour forth from across the chamber. Species after species shared stories of Drakmaran abuses that had gone unreported for fear of retaliation. Medical supplies confiscated under questionable legal interpretations, trade routes monopolized by military decree, entire colonies relocated to make way for Drakmaran expansion projects. Ambassador Krelix's scaled face grew darker with each testimony. "These allegations are without foundation," he declared. "Isolated incidents, misunderstandings, or outright fabrications designed to undermine legitimate authority." But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Michael Chen stood up in the human delegation section. "May I address the council?" he asked formally. High Chancellor Zephys nodded her permission. Michael walked to the central platform, his heart pounding. Unlike his son, he understood the full magnitude of what was happening. His next words could determine humanity's place in galactic civilization for generations to come. "Honored delegates," Michael began, "I'm not a politician or a diplomat. I'm a scientist and a father. 3 days ago, my son did something that every parent hopes they've taught their children to do. He stood up for what was right when he saw injustice. He looked directly at the Drakmaran delegation. But I want to address something that hasn't been discussed yet. After my son slapped that soldier, do you know what happened? The soldier didn't strike back. Despite his anger, despite his obvious desire for revenge, he restrained himself. Because somewhere in his training, somewhere in his upbringing, he knew that hurting a child was wrong." Michael's voice grew stronger as he continued. That tells me that even within the Drakmaran military, there are individuals who understand the difference between strength and cruelty. The problem isn't that Drakmarans are inherently evil. The problem is that good people, both Drakmaran and otherwise, have been afraid to speak up when they see wrong being done. He turned to address the entire chamber. My son isn't special because he's human. He's special because he's 8 years old and hasn't yet learned that sometimes it's safer to look away from injustice. But imagine if we could build a galaxy where adults didn't have to learn that lesson, where standing up for what's right was not just tolerated, but expected. Michael paused, gathering his courage for what he was about to propose. I suggest that this council establish a new institution, a Galactic Justice Commission, with representatives from every species, including Drakmaran. Its purpose would not be to replace Drakmaran enforcement, but to ensure that all galactic laws are applied fairly and justly, to provide oversight and accountability that has been missing for too long. The chamber erupted in discussion. The proposal was revolutionary, a check on Drakmaran power that had never existed before. Ambassador Krelix stood immediately. The Drakmaran Empire will never accept external oversight of our military operations. Such a proposal threatens the very foundation of galactic order. But before the debate could escalate further, another voice joined the conversation. To everyone's surprise, it was Fleet Admiral Vorthak, speaking from his command ship via holographic transmission. With respect, Ambassador Krelix, perhaps external oversight is exactly what we need. The chamber fell silent. A senior Drakmaran military officer was openly contradicting his empire's diplomatic position. Vorthak continued, his scarred face showing an expression none had seen before, uncertainty, even doubt. I have spent the last 3 days reviewing reports from across Drakmaran space. Incidents like the one on Kepler Station are not isolated. Our soldiers, given broad authority and minimal oversight, have grown overzealous in their enforcement activities. He paused, his yellow eyes finding Tommy in the human delegation. That human child showed more moral courage in one moment than I have shown in a century of service. Perhaps it's time we remembered that our purpose is to protect the innocent, not to intimidate them. The political earthquake that followed Vorthak's statement reshaped galactic civilization overnight. Within hours, other Drakmaran military commanders were speaking out about the need for reform. Within days, protest movements that had been building secretly for generations erupted into the open across dozens of worlds. The Drakmaran government, faced with internal dissent and external pressure, had no choice but to negotiate. The Galactic Justice Commission was established 6 months later, with its headquarters on Kepler Station, the site where a small human boy's slap had started a revolution. The Commission's first directive was to review all enforcement actions taken over the past decade and provide compensation to those who had been wronged. The Felinian trader who had nearly lost his medical supplies became the Commission's first director of humanitarian affairs. The Xantharian philosopher who had defended Tommy was appointed as chief ethics officer, and Fleet Admiral Vorthak, in an unprecedented move, resigned from the Drakmaran military to serve as the Commission's Director of Enforcement Reform. Tommy, meanwhile, returned to his normal life as an 8-year-old boy. He attended school on Earth, played with his friends, and helped his father with his scientific research. But children across the galaxy now learned about the day when a small human boy reminded everyone that doing the right thing was more important than following orders. 1 year after the incident, the Chen family returned to Kepler Station for the first anniversary celebration of what had become known as Justice Day. The marketplace where Tommy had confronted the Drakmaran soldier now featured a small monument, a simple statue of 2 hands, one large and one small, reaching toward each other. As Tommy stood before the monument, reading the inscription that had been written in every galactic language, his father knelt beside him. "Do you understand now what you did that day, son?" Tommy thought carefully before answering, as he always did. I think I showed everyone that being little doesn't mean you can't do big things. And that sometimes the biggest thing you can do is just be nice to people who need help. Michael smiled and pulled his son close. Around them, beings from dozens of species celebrated together in the marketplace that had once been a place of fear and exploitation. Your mother would have been so proud of you, Michael whispered. Do you think she knows? Tommy asked. Michael looked up at the stars visible through the station's transparent dome, thinking of his wife who had died when Tommy was just 4 years old. She had been a teacher who always told her students that kindness was the most important lesson they could learn. I think she knows, he said. And I think she's not surprised at all that her son changed the galaxy just by being kind. Tommy nodded solemnly, then brightened as he saw his friend, the young Felinian, whose father he had helped save. The two children ran off to play together, speaking in the universal language of laughter and friendship. Behind them, adults from across the galaxy continued their work of building a better civilization. A civilization where the smallest voice could speak the greatest truths, and where the simple act of standing up for what's right could change the course of history. The Drakmaran Empire still existed, and they still maintained order across the galaxy. But now they did so with oversight, accountability, and the constant reminder that true strength comes not from the ability to inspire fear, but from the wisdom to inspire hope. And in classrooms across 100,000 worlds, children learned about the day when a little human boy showed the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply the courage to say, "That's not right," and mean it. The age of fear was ending. The age of justice had begun. And it all started with a slap.